that primarily?
When my parents were living in our home, the almost 11 years we were at headquarters, and my mother had severe problems with her legs. So we came home to help them, and our house had stairs in it, and she couldn't do that anymore. She couldn't climb stairs.
Okay.
So we had to make arrangements for them. So that was a paramount reason. But at the same time, the child abuse situation was becoming so profound in my life. All I could do was think about this, and as information was coming to me, and the discussions were daily with a very small group of people in the writing department, four basically. Lloyd Berry over the department, he knew about the issue. He was very well acquainted. He was a very smart man, actually. Had a lot of education, worldly education behind him anyway.
Okay.
So when I told Harry Ployan that I was leaving Bethel, I also suggested that we needed to convince the governing body that we had a really serious problem. So he and I we brainstormed on it. And so we decided, due to some information I'm not going to now discuss, it just takes too long. It's not a secret. It just takes too long.
Okay.
And we discussed that the issue at the time was regarding repressed memories. After The Awake came out, so many people came forward, men and women, and said they remembered when they were abused. They had pushed it aside. And then in years later, after this, they were triggered, and they remembered what happened to them. And it was men in positions. It wasn't the rank and file Jehovah's Witnesses. It was men in positions that molested them. I have heard back in those years every kind of story you can imagine of this, that this was happening. There was accusations of ritual abuse.
Within the organization?
Within the organization. I'm not saying that it was true, and I'm not saying it was false.
Sure, but those are the accusations.
And I have, yes. And so what do you do? So I was asked to do research on repressed memories. So I kind of became a pretty much an expert on it. But at the same time, the governing body was being influenced by Ted Jarris, who is a very powerful member of the governing body. Many of them called him the boss. And very powerful member of the governing body. Many of them called him the boss. And so he was saying that there wasn't any such thing as repressed memories. And so we're having problems. If you can't believe people, in fact, I think November of '95, Watchtower makes a statement that if you have someone come forward in one place and they remember through repressed memories, and then in another place somebody else says it, and it was the same molester, back that time, that wasn't two witnesses, that two victims about the same person, because it was due to repressed memories. So you see how that influenced believing the victims.
Right. So Ted Jarris basically, his assertion was that, like, for example, all of these letters that they received and all of that and all of these accusations, that they basically just were products of people's perhaps subconscious reaction to what they, read in the articles. It wasn't actually due to because he basically, it sounds like he refused to believe that these things were actually happening, especially to that level of prevalence within the organization.
Absolutely.
Okay.
He was, when he learned about the Awake magazine with this article, he learned about it the same time I learned about it, and everybody else at Bethel when the Awake magazine came in his room. He was the overseer of service. He was also the on the teaching committee. But writing department was separate, as service was separate from writing. Service didn't ask writing, even though they had a governing body over them. And this writing had governed, but they didn't say, "Oh, let me run this by you for your approval." They were absolutely separate. So the only time when writing would talk to another area would be when there would be a change of belief. Okay,
right.
So then the key members of the teaching committee would be involved. Well, Jairus was on that, and but he did not know that this article was coming out, and he was against it. I was told. And so in time, April 8th of 92 was an article about thanking the governing body for this October issue. Letters were used, and it says a breath of fresh air. Well, Lloyd Berry was gone on a zone visit, and this is what happened. Ted Jairus found out that this article on the April 8th following year was coming out. He tried to stop the presses. He was dead set against it. And so, because that article was linked with the October 8th, thanking for it. So when the report came in from the press room, whoever was overseer there, and to the writing department, it was Jack Barr, who was assistant, who had to make the decision. And he was a very wonderful man. He and his wife, we were friends. He's a kind, loving man. And he was not of a strong personality. And he didn't know what to do. So he involved the senior writers. And they all told him that you can't allow this to happen. This isn't Jairus's department. You can't allow him to what the writing department should print. And so he then made sure that the article went through. So that was very obvious what was happening with Jairus. We also had reports, and I was part of it happening almost every week. There was something big that was happening. The child abuse. Many of the elders who were very loving and kind, they were trying to set up classes. Some actually did to help victims of child abuse. Nice. And there was, when the service department found out, they're over all of the congregations and the elders, and they put a stop to it. And the attitude and some in the service department was that it was a fad. Child abuse was just a fad, and you can't believe this. You can't get on the bandwagon. The world is in this fad. And so there was definitely strong feelings. Also, Lloyd Berry, many years before, he was the overseer of the Japanese branch. And this was in the mid-50s. And Ted Jairus was the overseer of the Australian branch. And something happened with Ted Jairus, and he was removed from his position as overseer and moved to California, told to go to California. The accusations against him are not out there, but it was Knorr who had Lloyd Berry come from Japan to investigate. So Lloyd knew what it was. recommended his removal. In the years, many years later, I was informed that Ted Jarris was removed for molestation.
Okay. Wow.
See, Ted went to Gilead at the end of the 40s, the early 50s, somewhere right in there. I could locate it.
Okay.
And he was waiting on his paperwork to go to Australia in the beginning of the 50s. I know that. But by around the mid 56, 55, 56, the accusations were against him.
I see.
When he went, Nora told him to go to California. And 6 months, right away, he went and married. He told the woman he married that he was never going to marry. He told 6 months before he was never going to marry. I have that as a fact. But he married her right away. And then within 6 months, Nora put him into the special work. So they were into the circuit work. And then into the branch district work. And from there, just before 72, I have the actual dates, and he was called in to be a governing body member. I have an understanding also on that whole period of time. And so I cannot understand what happened, why. He was never claimed to be one of the anointed. And all of a sudden, he becomes one of the anointed at the end of the 60s. So apparently Nora had to tell him that what was going on, because Ray France was causing this whole issue to come to the fore, that to do it the Bible way, you had to have a religious governing body. And the reason I say that is because in the book of Acts, the description of going up to Jerusalem and handling the problems of the early Christian organization, apparently there was a governing body over the early Christians. Well, the governing body at that time, in the 50s up till the 72, was Knorr and Franz and Suter. And they were the president, vice president, and secretary of two corporations. So they were, if you look in the Proclaimer's book, the early chapters talk about these men were the governing body. And Ray France is showing, plus another fellow that he worked closely with, who I won't mention his name, and Dunlap also, and him, that the governing body, it's a religious sense, a spiritual sense, and not to be, just because you're president of a corporation, that doesn't make you the governing body of in a religious sense. So at the time, 18 people became of the governing body, and Nora did not like it. Ray France's book talks about that.
Yes.
And so Nora is not happy about this, so he invites, you know who, Ted Jarris, to come to New York, and he becomes a governing body member.